Hello. So, funny story about Jesse Heyman and Bar Raffaele. Guess how many takes they had to do before they shot the final? Anybody? 20. It was Jesse Heyman's best day of his life. I'm telling you right now, man, it was unbelievable how excited that guy was. Bar, not so much. In fact, we had shown Bar a picture of somebody different and said, well, this is who's going to be on set with you. And then we head faked her, and it was this Jesse Heyman guy. She's like, you're kidding, right? No, that's the guy you're going to be kissing all day long today. All right, so what I'm going to cover today is a couple different kinds of leadership, transformational, transactional. We're going to go through cause-based and business-based change, and go through a little bit of storytelling. And I know this is an unusual way to start a story, but I'll do it anyway. You learn a lot about somebody on a golf course. My mom used to drop me off when I was 11 years old. I was super hyperkinetic. I had a boatload of energy. She didn't want to hire a babysitter for me, I think. So she would drop me off at the golf course in the morning with a sack lunch and pick me up at night. And in the daytime, I would walk around this golf course with grown-ups all day long, just hitting a golf ball. You know, and I didn't get very good at it. I was still pretty bad. But I've learned something, that you learn a lot about people on a golf course. You're with them for 4 hours, at least, sometimes longer. And you learn if they cheat. Are they too hard on themselves? Do they have unreal expectations of their ability? Are they kind? Do people treat them like they're nice? You can just see all this on a golf course. Okay, now, I just lay that out because I'm going to go into some other storytelling, but that is relevant because roughly, I guess it was 2012, fall of 2012, so 5 years ago, I was about to pull the trigger to be CEO of a company that was in the Silicon Valley, a more traditional tech company, and I got a phone call from a Heidrick & Struggles headhunter who said, what do you know about GoDaddy? And I said, well, I know a couple things. I know I have 48 domains that I own that under their management. So I own 48. I had 48 ideas that I'm going to turn into something big someday. That's how it all works. How many people here have domains? How many people here have domains with GoDaddy? Almost the same amount. So we have actually 70 million domains under management now. So there's a high likelihood that you're a customer of ours if you've ever been in that business or you host a website. The interesting thing was, I said, look, I know what they do. I know about their commercials. Like, the commercials make no sense to me, and they kind of offend me a little bit. And I know the products aren't that good. So why do you guys want to talk to me? And they said, well, look, Bob Parsons, this gentleman that you see here, who is a legend, and I'll explain why. This gentleman built a company out of his own pocket, never took a dime of venture capital, grew it to $1 billion. And so this headhunter says, are you interested? Maybe they're looking for a CEO, they want a product guy. I've built products my whole life. I said, yeah, sure. I'll look at it, but I'm not interested because they're so controversial. They're not very well liked. My family thinks the commercials are horrible, and that's how they represent themselves. So I don't know. I don't know what should I do. He goes, well, let me send you this document. Sends me a document, and my mind explodes. $1 billion company, almost $150 million in free cash flow, had about 3,000 employees, had built a $1 billion company, 80% aided brand recognition in the United States, 85% customer retention, an LTV to CAC of 10x, lifetime value to customer acquisition cost of 10x, which is insanely good. And I looked at these numbers and I thought, holy crap, their products aren't that great. And they've been able to do all this with unbelievable marketing. Bob is a brilliant marketer. And I thought, yeah, I should take a look at this. So this man actually grew his market share in 3 weeks by 20%. by doing a Super Bowl ad that was incredibly controversial. Y'all familiar with that campaign? Anybody? So he did a Super Bowl ad that had a woman that was making fun of the Janet Jackson faux pas from the year before in the Super Bowl, and it was so offensive that the network called him after the first commercial and said, because he bought 2 spots, they ran the first spot, and they said, you know, we got so many people calling the network telling us how horrible this is that we're not going to run the second spot. But we feel so bad about it, we're going to credit you with the first spot. This Super Bowl ad, there's $3 million back in the day. He didn't pay for it. Not only that, because he had the ad pulled, he got to go on like a 3-week press tour talking about the ad, talking about what he knew about it, and his comments were this. You know what I know about the Super Bowl? They're mostly guys watching it, and they're mostly drunk. So that's what I did. I ran it that way. Brilliant marketer, never took a dime of outside capital, and he sold to private equity, KKR, Silver Lake, TCV, for $2 billion. And they went into product guy. So I said, yeah, I'm interested. Well, okay, so I started talking to the board, had conversations with them. They asked me what I wanted to do. I told them what my investment thesis was. Said, look, if I was going to do this, like you guys have made $1 billion, you've never left the United States. I said, I'd grow this thing globally. I'd flatten the platform. I'd hire good product guys. I'd open offices in Santa Clara and Sunnyvale, New York and LA, Seattle. I'd go get the best possible developers I could get. I'd change the marketing and flip it around so people saw what we did and who we do it for and who we are as a company. Because the people that I've met don't look like how we're portraying ourselves publicly. I said, I think I'd do all that. So the board said, that's cool. That's our investment thesis as well. But you're going to have to pass the last hurdle. You have to meet Bob. Because Bob and I are very different guys. Where did I meet Bob? On a golf course. So I asked the board, I said, look, I'm going to meet him, but I want to know a lot about this guy. And so I know from my past that I'm going to know more about him on the golf course than any other place. So I spent 4 hours with him, 5 hours with him on a golf course, walking around. We talked about people we knew. We talked about stuff we liked to do. He was so kind. He was funny. He was irreverent. He didn't have high expectations of his game. He shouldn't have. He was just such a nice guy. And everybody who came up and talked with him with such deference and love. They just really liked the guy. And so we didn't talk at all about business. And then we came in and had lunch. And we started talking about the business and what I perceived it could be, what he had built, how he had built it. Just unbelievable story of entrepreneurialism, just incredible. And I said, you know, I think I'm going to do this. And so I did it. And I jumped in, knowing full well that I was going to have to do something that was a pretty tough putt. You know, that's a 50-foot putt that breaks 15 times. And I was going to have to transform this company into something that was global and something that was much, much bigger, that had a bigger vision than being a domains company and doing, you know, shock and awe ads. So let's just talk about transformation for a minute. Nope, that's the American in me going hitting the wrong button. Sorry. So this guy is James Burns. I know he looks like somebody from Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. But he's actually a presidential biographer. He's a brilliant guy, and he came up with the notion of 2 different kinds of leadership, transactional leadership and transformational leadership. Transactional leadership is the kind of leadership when you kind of know what the course of the company is. You need to instill processes. You need to make sure you've got discipline, that you've got a product pipeline. It's not about cultural transformation. It's not about how you transform the company in people's minds and tell them you're something very, very different. Transformational leadership is about changing the bedrock of the company in people's minds externally and changing it internally inside the company and changing the way employees feel about it. 2 very different concepts. Both are required in different times. This required transformational leadership, and it required a transformational leader, which I have been doing in a number of companies over a really long time. So, 2 concepts, transactional, transformational. Another concept to get your hands around is Think of business and culture. There's business transformation, cultural transformation. They are both required. Business transformation is a completely different thing where you're thinking about how am I going to grow this thing? What am I going to do to make people think about this business differently? And then cultural is how can I make the people inside believe it, and what can they link into? What can they sink their hands into that says this is more important than just a business? This is something that changes the world in a fundamental way, because that's what everybody who really wants to work at a company for a long time wants to do. They want to work on something that is meaningful, not something that just makes money and produces, great results. That's transactional. You want to have great results, but you also want to produce something that has more inside. So when people spring out of bed in the morning, they're not thinking about how many dollars they're going to make for the company. They're thinking about how they're going to change a customer's life. Those are two very different things. I'm going to tackle both of them independently and how we went around doing this over the last 5 years. And I'll give you some results of where we've ended up today in the last 5 years. By the way, I retire December 31st. Just heads up. All right. Gonna get used to that. Okay, so what do? You start with a vision hypothesis. And a vision hypothesis is where you say to yourself, okay, what can this thing be? I believe, and this was my vision hypothesis for GoDaddy, I believe this can be the largest platform for people that have an idea and want to turn it into something real online. I think that's what this company can be, and they can do it globally. Now, when you're doing a vision hypothesis, you can't just sit there, delusionally on your couch and say, oh man, we're gonna be this giant global thing and then just start writing about it. You actually have to convince people that it's right. But while you're convincing them that it's right, you also have to be asking them questions. Am I delusional? Am I out of my mind? Does this make sense at all? So that's what I started doing. I called the smartest people I knew. I called people I know hate everything, or at least every idea I've ever had. I'm just looking in the audience. Anybody here that has hated every idea ever? No emotion, not all of them. And I started asking questions. I think this could be this giant small business platform. Nobody's actually done this at a global level. There's a lot of fragmented guys out there that are doing it. The average revenue per user we get is pretty low. It's like $150 a year. I don't think it's interesting to Amazon or Microsoft or Google. Do you guys think I'm nuts? So I'm calling these guys that I know are smarter than me that are at Microsoft and Google and Yahoo and eBay and PayPal and a couple of financial institutions. I'm asking them, do you think I'm nuts? And they're going, man, that actually could work. And so you take that feedback and you start testing it. You start working hard on testing it, and you actually start digging in to the company. Now, when I'm having those conversations with those folks that I'm asking questions about what they think about this hypothesis, what am I doing simultaneously? I'm recruiting them. So as I was asking these guys that I had worked with at other companies over the course of my career, I'm saying, is this something you might be interested in? This company's only valued at $2 billion right now, and I think this is a $20 billion valuation. That's a pretty big kicker. And if we do this thing that's really interesting and we actually change the world for these tiny businesses that want to do something bigger, we actually might be able to make a lot of money for a bunch of investors and maybe even ourselves. But the thing that's going to get people springing out of bed in the morning is a vision that is about changing the world. So bringing it into the company and starting asking those questions to folks inside the company. I took the job, I'm there, vision hypothesis tests out, all the smart guys think it makes sense. I've actually hired 5 of the people that I tested: James Carroll, Alyssa Murphy, Arnold Blinn. Some guys in the audience know these people. And on and on and on, and 3 layers, 4 layers deep. And then I start talking to people inside the company. And here's a weird thing. Now let's talk about, that's business transformation, right? Talking about business transformation, talking about something that's bigger than life. When you start talking to folks who have been in a company that long and have been in a domains business and didn't think of themselves as a platform for small business, they're looking at you like, the hell are you talking about, man? We're the biggest company in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where the company was. And I remember having a conversation with a developer saying, hey, man, we're going to have to start hiring developers from the Valley. And he goes, that's the only place we hire from. And I looked at him kind of cockeyed, and I thought, you guys haven't hired anybody from the Silicon Valley. He goes, oh, the Silicon Valley? Oh, I thought you meant the Valley of the Sun, Arizona. That's where we are. I'm like going, okay. So we have some possible cause for me to be concerned at this point. So I start asking these guys, what do you like? And I'm a very disarming guy. I'm like, what do you like about the company? What do you think's awesome? What do you think sucks? What do you think's horrible? And they look at me and they go like, you're the CEO. I can't tell you what I think sucks about the company. And so I started out saying like, okay, I'll tell you something that sucks. Everybody in this company has to fill out a time card. The CFO came to my office on Friday. The CFO, this is a over $1 billion revenue company, comes to my office and goes like, dude, you haven't signed my time card yet. It's my first week in the office. I'm like, you have a time card? You're the CFO. How many hours do you put in a week? I don't know, 60, 80, I don't know, a lot. Put a ton of hours in. So why the hell are you signing a time card? Well, because, if people don't sign time cards, we don't know if they're working when they're supposed to be working. So I'm going, so we got a little trust issue, I guess, right? Is that why there are locks in all these different places and nobody can get into the exec area? So I start telling the story to guys who are like, that's just stupid. It makes no sense. And what I found is really interesting, that culture is this really weird thing that employees tend to do, and you might do this at your company too. You have a table and you have this beautiful crystal pyramid on the table, and you go, that's my culture. These are my cultural values and my beliefs, and they're so wonderful. This is what our company is. Look how great it is. Now, it turns out that this little crystal pyramid goes actually underneath the table, and there's all kinds of shit underneath the table that nobody will talk about, especially to the CEO, unless the CEO starts taking cracks at it. And all the guys, every man, every woman that I talked to in the company would say to me, well, that time card thing's totally stupid. I don't understand the locks. The commercials really embarrass me. What I don't understand is, why do we only have like 15 developer guys that are actually working on stuff and everybody else is just trying to keep equipment up and running? Why haven't we actually gone into the public cloud? Why haven't we opened a data center on the East Coast? Just on and on and on. And listening to these guys, it was like, yes, they want change. They're ready for change. So digging in deep, getting that stuff going, allowed me to start taking some pretty big steps inside the company to make some significant changes. And make it safe for all of these people that are coming in from other companies to feel safe and saying, like, we're going to make changes. You're going to love them. You may not love them. You may not like them. You probably want to work somewhere else if you don't. But this is going to be something that's transformational. And this company is going to look a hell of a lot different 5 years from now and 10 years from now than it does today, which is a Phoenix-based domains business. So that's vision hypothesis. That's testing it. That's getting it into places where you can get your company's employees excited about it. This is before you even unleash it on customers. And then the next step is actually writing it down. I don't know how many of your companies you actually write stuff down in prose versus PowerPoint. What I've found is that PowerPoint is, I think, probably one of the most dangerous tools on the planet, where people will shorthand stuff and then just fill in the blanks depending on what audience they're talking to. And so I'm a huge proponent of, like, you put together, and we used to call it 220-200, two-page vision document that you give to the entire company. Everybody in the company reads it. 20-page document that you give to the top guys in the company that allows them to have, meet and understand what's actually, happening. They can fill it out. There's enough there that they can actually start making some guesses. And then you do a 200-page operating plan that you do every year. You change that 2-page document, hopefully very little, because if it's a strategy document, it talks about the strategy, it talks about what the organization looks like that's going to deliver the strategy. That should not change very often, maybe once every 4 or 5 years. The 20-page document shouldn't change either. It should actually have a couple of nuances. You'll go back and you'll look at that thing every year, make nuanced stuff that happened competitively in the marketplace. Maybe some economics happened that were different than some of the hypotheses you had initially, and they didn't test out. And that 200-page document changes every year, every single year. And write it down in detail. It actually forces you to commit. And if you have a PowerPoint and it's just a bunch of bullet items, you're not committed to it. You're looking at the audience, you're going like, oh, okay, here's what the bullet says, and I'm just going to start filling it out with real, kind of meat, depending on who I'm talking to. So we actually went into gruesome detail and storytelling about who our customer was. We segmented our customer into psychographic segments versus vertical segments. We went into, you're a nascent, you just have an idea. You're small and hungry. You're up and running and dreaming big. You're established and content. You're an e-commerce customer. Or you're somebody who does a domain investing. And that cycle changed the way that we thought about our customer, changed the way that we defined, and then we tested that hypothesis on what our customers look like globally and said, oh shit, this thing is actually homogenous around the world. We can go do this everywhere. We started there. One of the most important pieces of that document was having a vision that was just super powerful, that was just made people go like, man, that's awesome. It started with a vision and then went down into granular detail on what that looked like. The vision statement in that document was bigger than life. It was radically shifting the global economy towards life-fulfilling, independent ventures. For people that have, a desire to do something on their own, they don't want to work for somebody anymore, they want to go out and work on their own, or they were fired and they lost their job, or they had a second kid and they couldn't work and they want to go do something by themselves. And it turns out that people really want to do this. Now, it's a hard thing to metricize because what you have to do is go look at world's GDP growth 10 years hence after doing something like this and saying, wow, people are actually enabling folks to go get online, build their own business, work for themselves at a rate that's never happened in the world before. It's not going to be just us. It won't just be GoDaddy. We're going to be the first guys who actually say this is going to be where we're going. And I've spelled it out and I've talked to Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, Amazon, Microsoft, Google about this stuff. And they think it's real. They just don't know if the customer spends enough money to make it important to them. But it is a powerful changer that the company got behind and said, boy, that's really exciting. I want to figure out how to go do that. And then we have a lot of metrics that sit underneath it. Now, that's business transformation. Now, there's another thing that I talked about, which is cultural. And cultural is interesting because you have to pick a cause, I posit, you have to pick a cause that resonates with your customer base, resonates with your company, and is solving something that's good that actually forwards your business. And then you have to be a beacon for the cause. You have to be the person that will get up on stage and talk about it and push it really hard and say, this is where we're going. In my case, and what mattered the most to me was changing the game for women in technology. Women engineers, insanely underrepresented. Less than 20% of engineers in the Silicon Valley today are women. They're not paid equally. There's no pay transparency. It's a major issue. World Economic Forum says, overall, globally, we're 70 years away, 170 years away from having equality between the sexes in pay and rights. And even in our most advanced places, Silicon Valley I'll use as an example, we have some huge issues, many of which now, thank God, are actually being talked about openly. But this became a very big beacon for us. What percent of small businesses, folks, are run by women? Guesses? 70, a little high, 58% globally. 58%. So if we can actually say to women, we're your supporter, we're not going to use shock and awe misogynistic advertising to actually go forward our products. We're going to represent you in commercials that show you as a strong business person, doing the right thing, fighting the good fight, and we're going to do it in a funny and humorous way, but that's what we're going to do. That's the easy part. So we did that. And I actually personally put myself out in a couple of places to let people know that we were going to be doing this. Got support from the board, said, yep, that makes sense. Let's go for it. And we started doubling down and actually participating in a lot of things. I want to talk real briefly about why this matters as much to me personally. So my sister was sort of my doppelganger. She was a few years younger than me. And she was one of the world's foremost researchers on the media's effect on women's body image and self-esteem and its likelihood to create anorexia or bulimia in women. Tragically, when she was 37, she was pregnant about 2 weeks away from giving birth, had so much blood in her system that her aorta ripped and she passed away, and her daughter passed away. And my pledge to her was that I would do everything in my power, in my business, to forward women as much as she tried to help their cause when she was fighting for something that was incredibly right. And so I took that personal cause on. Didn't think, when I took this role at GoDaddy, that flipping the advertising from using women as part of the shock and awe to like valuing them, and then making sure that when I hired my first chief technical officer was a woman, my first board director was a woman, to actually start putting my money where my mouth was and getting the support of my board to say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I get it. So incredibly personally important, and I posit that if you're going to take something on as a leader in your group, whether it's a small team or it's a whole company, and our company now is around 8,000 people, it has to resonate with everybody, and it has to be incredibly personal and very valuable, which for me, it really is. So, and you actually have to do real representation. So we established something called GoDaddy Women Technology. And I remember standing up at an all-hands meeting because we had this thing called GoDaddy Girls, which were kind of, t-shirt wearing, people dancing at trade shows and stuff. It's like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to have GoDaddy women, and you're it, and your engineers, and your accountants, and your finance people, and you are marketers, and you are the lifeblood of us, and we want more of you working in a very diverse set of roles across this company. And we're going to do a lot to get ourselves there. GoDaddy Women Technology, this is Gail Jacoby. She's a SVP with us. This is a software developer running all of our UX and our experience teams for development. Incredibly powerful woman. Another woman, Lauren Antonoff, along with her, runs this thing. And we bring together women and men to talk about issues and to actually talk about what we're going to do in the future and what we're doing right now to solve some of the issues that the entire industry has. It's not enough just to get folks inside the company talking about it. It's getting folks outside the company talking about it. So this is Maria Klawe. Maria Klawe is the president of Harvey Mudd University, which is a university which transformed itself from having 15% women computer scientists to graduating 50%, which is sort of where we want to be in the world. If we had 50% of women actually being computer scientists today, the 500,000 jobs in the United States that go unspoken for in computer science today would be full. We wouldn't have the issue, but we do. This woman I asked to come speak at GoDaddy Women in Technology when there's no evidence. We haven't put any points on the board yet with the exception of a couple commercials that were shifting the company. And a woman named Sabina Nawaz, who was somebody I mentored at Microsoft very early in her career, in 1992, that's how old I am, and spent time with her. She became this incredible, powerful woman who actually managed to hold together all the exec team, and she was mentoring the entire exec team when I left the company in 2007. She was Maria Klawe's exec coach, helping Maria get through some imposter syndrome things. You guys probably know what an imposter syndrome is. We all have it from time to time. And my first conversation with Maria, she goes, I just told my husband I was going to talk with the CEO of GoDaddy. And you know what he said to me? No. He goes, GoDaddy? That's a horrible company. Because of everything he'd seen on TV, because he didn't know what was happening inside the company. He didn't know what we were going to do over the course of the next 4 years. And so that conversation actually led Maria to go, wow, I believe you. she introduced me to Tella Whitney, the CEO of the Anita Borg Institute, which holds the largest computing conference for computer scientists in the world. It's mostly women. It was 8,000 women, 18,000 women in Orlando this year, 12,000 before that in Houston, 8,000 before that, so it's growing at a pretty big crack. She came and talked because now she believed it. Madeline Denono, who's the head of the Gina Davis Foundation, came and talked. We had a number of women CEOs come and talk, and they start getting it. And then I was asked to speak at a Male Allies panel at the Anita Borg Institute, where I had death threats. I was told I was a pig because of all the stuff that had happened at GoDaddy. How dare I even show up at a conference for women in computing? And you know, sometimes you just got to stand up and say, You know, I had a special, detail that were there to make sure I didn't get killed, which was good. I appreciated that. But actually went around and had a session where it was the CTO of Google, of Facebook, of Intuit, and me talking about how we support women and what we do. And a woman named Robin Hauser Reynolds, who did a documentary called Code: Debugging the Gender Gap. Anybody seen this movie? Go see this film. It's a documentary, incredibly powerful. It's about how the bro culture and technology has sort of taken over and kind of pushed women out. Brogrammers, it talks about, and making that something that is actually very real. It's not made up. It's a real thing. And so she came up afterwards. She goes, I heard your story. I totally believe it. Would you mind being the executive producer on this film? I said, yeah, sure. That'd be awesome. Then the next year, I ended up doing a keynote with the CTO of the United States, myself, and a woman who was talking about personal transformation, Clara Shih, who is a very fine entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley, talking about country transformation, company transformation, and individual personal transformation. And that is in the course of 3 years. Now, if you kind of look back over time, the company has, and I'll just give you some quick numbers. Remember where I started, Phoenix, 3,500 employees, very different. We're in 60 countries worldwide. We're not $1 billion, we're $2.6 billion. This is in 5 years. We have employees in almost every country in the world, 1,100 just in Europe alone. We've been voted as one of the top 12 companies for technical women to work in. You know, sharp contrast to 4 or 5 years ago, because people believed it. And your job when you're trying to be a transformational leader is to be a belief creation machine. That's your gig. And sometimes you have to do extreme things to be that person, and it's uncomfortable, and people give you death threats and call you a pig and do all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's worth every freaking minute of it. Because that's how you actually transform a company, both business and culture. And if you do it right, they go hand to hand and they actually build on each other. And I'm leaving in December, but the next guy who's coming in, Scott Wagner, an incredibly capable CEO, is totally committed to what we're doing across both our business transformation, cultural transformation. He's just going on with it. This is something we did at the Grace Hopper, where we actually didn't just talk about how many women we have, which is a typical number that most Silicon Valley companies do. We actually went down to the detail of talking about how much they were paid by job position across the company. And then we found out that, boy, they look like they're paid about the same. Thought, wait a minute, I bet that the women's promotion trajectory is slower than men's. Went back and researched that. It was true. We changed some things, some practices in the company that were actually slowing women's promotion trajectory, and we now have 30% more promotions for women than we had in the previous year. Just because we took a critical look at it, we got the entire company behind it, and we said, this is what transformation looks like. If we do it for our company, we can do it for the entire industry. Let's do that. And really, I talked about doing something that feels like it's bigger than just driving a business. That's how you get employees aligned behind you and how you get them feeling like, God damn, I want to work here. I really want to work here. Because you're committed, everybody's committed, we're all trying to get things that are done that are really good for the world, both letting entrepreneurs become their own boss and helping a class of society, a gender on the planet that has been underrepresented in a technology that should be, frankly, even with men. And it hasn't happened. If we went back to the 80s, 20% better than it is today because of the programmer stuff that happened in the 90s and the early 2000s. So that how the world should be framed, I think really, really matters. And there's a woman, pretty controversial actually, occasionally, a woman named Margaret Mead, who had something that she said that I believe to this day. It was one of my sister's favorite quotes. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And if you have just a few people, let's say 8,000, that believe some stuff can actually happen and be dramatically changing for individuals who are trying to do things that are different, they're trying to be their own boss, they're trying to figure out how to make their family capable of having a meal. Maybe it's, I want to have Fridays off, maybe I want to have my children work for me. And by the way, while you're doing that, you're actually trying to solve a bigger problem that's representative in the valley and in other places. That really matters. What I just ask people to do is when they're thinking about this stuff, if you have picked something, keep your foot on the accelerator, keep going forward, and don't let people tell you it's stupid, it doesn't make sense, how dare you. Just pay no attention to it and just drive through it. And I think you'll all be in a better place. Maybe you're doing it already, and if you are, thumbs up. All right, I am totally done.